Conditions 18 plus.
Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin and Bob Marks.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
Joining us as this week's special guest is Michael Antoniades, the mutual expert. Michael, welcome back to the Harness Racing Alumni Show.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well.
Okay. Michael, let's talk about the decline in handle. What can you tell us about that?
Well, everything goes in trends, right? Business goes up, business goes down. So I thought the best way to do this for this show would be to try and explain where I get my ideas and 30 years of experience. So we talked about the boardwalk and 30 years ago in 95, where we found out that giving high-end bettors a 9% rebate will drastically increase their handle. And from that, spawned RGS and Elite and some other groups. And we learned 30 years ago that if you lower takeout, you get a big response. That was 1995. So in 1995, simulcasting began, and what we learned was going against the Meadowlands, if you were Sportsman's Park or any other track, we quickly found out that running a Sportsman's Park race near the Meadowlands, handle would get crushed. I'm sure a lot of other tracks figured that out. So we put that, we learned that. Then we fast forward to 1998, and what we learned was there was a night where there were 11,000 people at the track, and we locked them out 15 deep the first race. So to alleviate the problem, we took an extra 2 to 3 minutes at the gate, and we found out that this had an incredible effect on increasing handle. Again, this is 1998. So one night in 98, the perfect storm, we had a field of 8 $4,000 claimers, finally spaced them off the Meadowlands. California took the race, and lo and behold, that race did $200,000. 2 years later, Balmoral ascended into being the number 2 track in the country, and on their big night, they did almost $3 million. So now we fast forward to 2011, where Chris Schick comes up with strategic wagering. So what did Mr. Schick teach us? Lowering takeout, free program pages, and guaranteed pulls was a way to get people interested in horse racing. The next year, the Meadowlands returns, no drag, race every 20 minutes, handle plummets. In 2012, Balmoral goes to a 7-minute drag, and in that same year, increased handle $26 million. And what's significant is that their sister track, Maywood, who refuses to lower takeout and drag at the gate, watches handle decrease. 3 years later, I get hired by the Meadowlands to schedule post times by Jason Settlemore and Sam McKee. We increase the drag, we coordinate post times with other tracks, and it works. 2016 winter meet, we averaged $3 million. That's pre-subsidy, and that's on nights when the total purses sometimes were under 100,000. So handle was 30 times more than the purses on some nights. The next year, Sam dies, and he's irreplaceable. Spark is gone forever, and it was a difficult year for everybody. But then the next year, we got sports betting and a subsidy in New Jersey. We regroup. The team, led by Jason, formulates a new plan, 5-year subsidy, raises purses in the next 5 years. Handle to Meadowlands grew by $300 million. Then we have COVID 2 years later, and COVID changes everything. More bettors now play on their phones, live handle decreases. But the next 3 years were great ones because we had better communication with our partners and our major players, and that pays off. In 2023, the Meadowlands averaged $3 million for the entire year. The next year, they would do the same. I went to Oak Grove, a small track in Kentucky, and handle has nearly tripled in 3 years, trying to incorporate some of the same things we did at the Meadowlands and some other places. In 2024, we went to the Jug, and although the purse dropped $350,000 and there were 3 less races, handle increased on those 2 days $700,000, and the Jug had their best day in decades. And then I go with John Campbell. I think I learned an incredible amount from him, and hopefully He learned the gambling side of the business from me. Together with the Hambletonian Society, we moved the needle on our marquee events substantially. The Hambletonian handled over $7 million the last 3 years. The Hambletonian race, which was under 500,000 some years, now is over $1 million. Delaware up 700,000 on those 2 days. So what have we learned from a gambling perspective? A, post times will make or break you. If you get the wrong post times, you can't succeed. Post time coordination is one of the single most important things you can do to increase handle and revenue. You can't run the race on top of major tracks. If you do, it's at your own risk. And I think on this show and Larry Rollo's show, we both said the takeout is too high. That if you apply the blended 20% rate takeout to casino games and sports, there wouldn't be a sports book or casino in the country. So that brings us to the Meadowlands. And let me just say this. This is difficult for me, but there was a moment when President Bush was eulogized by Senator Alan Simpson. The two things I loved the most out of that eulogy were the subjects of loyalty and laughter. And on the subject of loyalty, I still have loyalty to the Meadowlands. I was let go around Christmas. For the decade, we did a lot of amazing things together, which included bringing the Meadowlands and harness racing back from the dead. So watching this 2025 season has been difficult, but these bad decisions about the drag shouldn't deflect anything about what Mr. Corral has done since he opened the Meadowlands in 2011. They were about to go out of business. When the FBI tried to clean up the game, he put millions of his own dollars to help. He's got some major skin in the game, and because of that, he gets a mulligan from me on this recent escapade. Simply speaking, they made a mistake, and they paid a huge price, and so did the sport. Let's move on. And the laughter part that Mr. Simpson, Senator Simpson talked about, I sit with a group of very knowledgeable people about racing, but they can keep you laughing for hours. They can turn to me and go, "You keyed a driver that's due for his last 60. Michael, you might just be the biggest imbecile in the country." So let's learn from comedy and laughing and lighten up. Everybody makes mistakes, except the people that don't try to do anything or the people that don't try anything. So maybe from a comedy perspective, Mr. Corral and Jason will reflect on this and maybe say, maybe we should have listened to that goofy Greek kid from Chicago. So let's open up the floor, and I'll try and answer any questions you have in a positive note.
Okay. Michael, now getting back to talking about the handles, most of the wagering is done now online, and the racetracks only receive about 3% of that. So isn't that they're not making a lot of money off the handles? You need like $10 million handles to be in the black.
Okay, let's keep it less personal. Let's not make it about the Meadowlands, but this has been a growing trend for 20 years. So if you have 5% of your handle is on track for your product, and you get 20% of that, and then you have 95% off track, and you're getting 5% of that. Are the people that have called simulcast wagering the cheap dollars correct? They're nowhere near correct. Most of the revenue is driven by dollars off track, and when we start realizing this, I think we'll run a more efficient business.
Now Kentucky seems to have the right formula, going with the historic wagering machines. The other tracks are tied up with the casinos and stuff like that. But if the gaming money's not put there, I don't think that they can survive. And
well,
that needs to be addressed to somehow, to how to save the tracks and how to basically be self-sufficient and not totally reliant on the money coming in from the gaming industry.
Well, I think we've talked about this on your show, that there will be a downsizing here, that we will lose some tracks. It's fairly inevitable unless something unforeseen happens. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, maybe that's a good thing, that there's not enough business to drive all these tracks. I'm talking about gambling business. So this doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. If you all recall, in 2008, every Atlantic City casino was going to go under, but they didn't because they downsized. Now they're doing fairly well. So could that happen to us? It certainly could.
Now, Bob, you've been monitoring the handles lately, haven't you?
Well, I've been looking at them. They're anemic, that's all I can say.
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
I said the handles that I've seen at most of these tracks, like Scioto, Oak Grove, or whatever, they're pretty anemic.
Okay. So how do we get more people to be betting? What type of gimmick should we be coming up with, and what can we get to get people to start betting to increase the handles?
Let's learn lesson number one, that we had 25 years ago, we found out that by taking a little time at the gate, handle increased. Didn't know why, but if you paid attention, you realized handle increased. When Mr. Graal opened the Meadowlands in 2012, he went with zero drag. In other words, he went right at zero, and he went with a race every 20 minutes. And what he found out his first year of the new Meadowlands is that business plan got annihilated, and it didn't work. And slowly, over the course of years, 4 years later, as we said, we were incorporating a 7-minute drag in 2016 with Jason. And in the winter of 2016, the winter meet averaged $3 million. And that was on some days where purses weren't $100,000. I mean, as I said before when I was going through this, there were days when handle was 30 times the purses. That's the model, all right? Now, that was 2016, and obviously we know that stake races can't support themselves off handle because, you know, they can't. So I think what we have to do, and they won't do it, they'll never do it, but if you ever started, if this were a newly started business as a startup, this is how you do it. You take your breeding people, like Mr. Marks, and you go, all right, so what do the stakes races have to go for at track C? Okay, figure that out. And then, now what do the young horses have to go for? The Nowers of 1, the Nowers of 2. Figure that out. And then bring your overnight people and say, what do the overnight purses have to be to get people to come race at our racetrack? Now we've got that figure. So now you simply say, we've got our purses for the overnights, we've got our purses for the stakes, we've got our purses for the young horses. How many days can we race and have the purses we need? And nobody does that. When we start doing that and realize that that number in the right corner has to be significantly higher, and to do that you have to race less, we might come around.
Okay, because if you look at the tracks right now, and if you go strictly by the handles coming in, none of the tracks can support the purses that they're putting out. The handles do not support the overkeep of the tracks and the purses. The money's just not there coming in betting-wise. That's the way I see it when I look at all these handles. And let's look at Yonkers. They have the biggest purses in the country. And, they don't do $1 million a night. I think
I think they learned a lesson the other day that perhaps those races should have stayed on Monday, where they get more support because you don't have to fight the Meadowlands, you don't have to fight Charlestown, you don't have to. You've got a lot of tracks out there on a Friday night, and it's a very difficult battle for a track like Yonkers, with 8 horses a race. So that's a killer to start with. So to go on a Monday night when instead of going against thoroughbreds in the Meadowlands, you're going up against Western Fair and smaller tracks like that, Harrington, of course you're going to compete better. So was it worth a try? Yeah, it was, but I think those races belong on Monday night. I think Horseshoe Indianapolis is a great example of a track that realized that, listen, we can't fight with Santa Anita and Gulfstream and Woodbine and Naira, and it just can't do it. So let's move our races to Monday through Thursday. And they've had incredible success because they understand the market.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. There's no doubt about that. But why aren't these guys waking up and realizing that, Mike? They need somebody like you to tell them, I guess, or their management doesn't really see what's really going on.
You have to understand, there's all kinds of things going on. First of all, the workers at the track want as many days as they can get, and sometimes some of the officials want as many days as they can get. And, this goes back to horse people. I always advocated that the purse should be based on field size. And the reason for that is if your race goes for 20,000 with 10 and your race goes for 20,000 with 5, well, who wants to race with 10? But if you adjusted that purse according to field size, now everybody, management, the horsemen get on the same page, realizing that there's a certain plus to going with a bigger field. Until we start working together, this really can't work unless you get a downsize of tracks. And it should work better because I think at its top the sport is absolutely magnificent. And this is not just BS by somebody that's in the business. I mean, any gambler can tell that at its best, this sport really is compelling. But so few of the races are compelling. And you've had people try. I mean, Mr. Gorell's tried, right? I mean, he tried to bring back what Joe DeFrank did at the Meadowlands. And he kind of knows that if you get that style of racing, the handle's going to go up. But with the exception of, like, the amateurs in 2021, 2022, where you saw that no holes and a lot of guys going to the front and everything, you just don't see it. And I think the tracks don't understand that the faster you make the track, the worse your racing is. Horses have to get around the turns, and if the speed just gets away from everybody, the gambling is going to be limited on your product, and who does that help? No one. But the way to generate money, to come back to your question, Freddie, you need more downtime, and you need less races, and you need better use of your simulcasting. Obviously, on a day when you're not racing and you're bringing in 15 or 20 tracks, those are the days where you make money. You're just going to have enough of those days to go along with your racing days. I think we race way too much.
I think a lot of horsemen would disagree with you on that one because they're making their livings off of the purse money coming in. But no, probably the correct answer is less tracks will probably save the sport in the bigger picture.
It's certainly possible.
We have a tremendous horse shortage right now. We're only producing about 7,000 registered foals a year, maybe 8,000, but that's not enough to sustain the business, and our older horses are not making it. Like, a lot of horses are retiring before their 4-year-old careers. and so we're losing the aged horse population. So those are a couple of issues that need to be.
Well, as some famous gamblers say, what do we have, a horse shortage or a track surplus? And you can make the argument on either side, right?
But I can always go back when we used to have about 60 tracks too. So we have cut down drastically on the number of tracks.
Right, but we have to adapt to market conditions, Freddie. I mean, we have to adapt to that. When we did have 60 tracks, there was no casino gambling, there was no legalized sports betting. So these are the conditions we have now. So do we just cry about it, or do we go, all right, how do we fix this? How do we make it? To go and say it would be great if every track had full fields, because all of a sudden now you get to handle surplus every one of those tracks. But it's difficult to make that happen. That's the goal.
Right. So Trey, did you want to jump back in here?
Well, I like what Mike is talking about, but Mike, what are you doing at the track that you're working at right now? What is your plan? What is your strategy?
Well, Kentucky is in a very good position here. They've got, first of all, the horse culture in Kentucky is tremendous. You've got one of the biggest companies in racing, Churchill Downs, based in Louisville. And the fact is, casino companies don't own the tracks in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Racetracks do. Right. So those racetracks are interested in being racetracks, and they have no interest in getting rid of the racing. So there's the paradox, right? Kentucky's interested in making racing as good as it can. Meanwhile, in other parts of the country, you have casino companies that aren't doing particularly well that perhaps want to get rid of racing.
Absolutely, so that's true.
It's a totally different thing. It's like, here, you go to Oak Grove and you go through the paddock and everybody's cheerful. The purses are great, right? And I'm sure it's the same at the Red Mile. It's a great venue. You go through the paddock at some of these places and the people have, despair. I mean, a lot of people aren't doing as well because the purses aren't high. And I come back to the breeding industry, which Bob should love, but I don't know how do you do it. It's like last year, Oak Grove had, in June and July, had maiden races going for $25,000. Now, this sounds insane until you start looking at the thoroughbreds. The maiden race in Churchill are going for $122,000. Now, nobody's saying we should go for $122,000. And Kentucky Downs, they'll be going for $170,000. Why? Because they want to support the yearling industry. They want to support the breeding industry. So for us to be on a similar plane 5 years from now, we have to get these younger horses to race for more. And the way you do that is you race less. But if you can get some of these mid-priced yearling buyers to start making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 without a stakes horse, they're going right back to the sales. Now you can shore up the middle part of the sales, and a lot of this gets solved. But these maiden prices and the non-winners of two, they have to go for significantly more if you're going to get people into the yearling game. And as we've talked, there is an enormous amount of money right now, and if you had the right product, I think you could get people into the horse racing industry right now.
Yeah, and Kentucky has a real good breeding incentive over there because Michelle was talking about it last week on our show, where she said that she had a horse that won in Kentucky that was New York bred, where she got, I think, $35,000 or $40,000. Had the horse been Kentucky bred, she would have gotten $90,000 for the first winning. And so that's a major incentive. It is a major incentive.
That is.
You have to drive the business with the breeding industry. But the breeding 100%. Industry, in the end, has to be the racing industry, the racing part of it has to be just as important. But I think if we fixed that, I mean, this would do a lot of good in getting people back into the business. Well, we talked about it, Freddie. We had a couple of guys that dropped out of the business, and they got back in after decades, on the sidelines. Why? Kentucky. Because Kentucky is talking all the positive stuff, and all the breeding, and it's exciting, and everybody is really in a positive way trying to improve everything. hopefully Mr. Grell gets his casino, because that place should be the flagship track, and everybody wants that place to be the flagship track. But to do that, the purses have to be higher. How do you do that? Obviously, a casino is one way.
Right.
Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay. That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for listening, and please don't forget to join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show